Dr. Noda is professor of Japanese at the Ohio State University. She is a specialist in East Asian language pedagogy, and her research interests include curriculum design, material development, and assessment. Her most recent publication is Nihongo Now, Performing Japanese Culture, published by Routledge in 2020. Dr. Noda will be talking about the role of pedagogical materials in PCA.
Thank you, Lasher. I'd like to preface this presentation with something that Samuel Beckett said or wrote. Ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. It's a nice idea about life's experiences and growth, that getting better means failing at a higher level. With that spirit, I'd like to think about pedagogical materials. First, in general, pedagogical materials are valuable in three ways, as far as I'm concerned. They select what elements to learn. This is especially important when the target of learning is something like language or culture. Both of these are kind of infinite. They're just so vast. So you need to be selective. They present elements in a particular fashion that promotes development, usually from short to long, less to more, simpler to more complex. They also support learning experiences. They provide clear goals as well as room for application. Materials in PCA share these features, fundamental features about pedagogical materials. They also have their special features. So pedagogical materials in PCA select usable elements. The elements must connect the learning work to actual usability in the field out there. To push the usability and memorability, presentations of elements, whether a kanji symbol or a storytelling strategy, are revisited in multiple contexts. And PCA materials support performance, that is, the doing with the language part. There may be a core set of performances for which learners do need to memorize lines for. There are also performances for which learners need to select or construct the appropriate lines on their own, on the fly, as they deliver, or as they listen to, or as they write, or as they read. I'd like to share some examples from a newly published material that I worked with colleagues in pedagogy as well as a professional filmmaker. I'll use as an example a scene script that students are to practice and rehearse from memory. So here is the scene script. This is from Act 2, or the second chapter in the textbook. The first chapter just introduces greetings, simple greetings. So this is really the first substantial chapter in the textbook. Let's look at the language content. I know that most of you are teachers and speakers of Chinese, but I hope the English provided can give you a suggestion of what's going on. The language in here, the Japanese, is pretty simple, but it's highly usable, therefore motivational. If you can use what you've learned, it gives pleasure, right? Confucius scholars. So using fairly simple language, the scene depicts an interaction between colleagues in a workplace. One junior person and another one, a senior person. There may be others in the office as well when this conversation takes place. As indicated in the blue boxes down below, Sasha, the junior person, is checking with Kanda-san, her supervisor, if it's okay for her to leave. Mr. Kanda, the supervisor, gives permission and then encourages her to go ahead and leave without concerns. So it's a very simple exchange. it's contextualized. The setting of this scene is clearly stated. The same characters, Sasha and Kanda-san, appear, this is Sasha Morris and Kanda-san, appear throughout the material along with other key characters. Learners are essentially shadowing their sagas as employees of Ogaki Shokai or Ogaki Trading. In terms of the language, there are two new concepts that are highlighted in yellow that are introduced in this scene. The verb for animate existence, arimasu, and the idea of junior-senior relationship. The scene depicts how Sasha Morris, the junior person in this setting, is careful to check before she leaves. And Kanda-san, the supervisor in this setting, who shows generosity and care. The final lines, the final exchange in this scene is exactly the same as something that was introduced and practiced in the previous chapter. So it's reintroduced and reinforced. The items highlighted in green or in green letters are introduced as special expressions or unanalyzed chunks because of their high frequency. They're analyzed structurally later, but having them as early as Act 2 or scene chapter 2 is intentional and purposeful. Someone who was reluctant to switch to this material, Nihongo Now, was criticizing it and called it a glorified phrase book. I submit that he, and it was a he wasn't far off, but I would call it a glorified phrasebook with strong emphasis on glorified. So much of what we do with the language is actually conventionalized. So phrases, we become accustomed to using phrases in particular ways through repeated socialization. A book of usable phrases is far more useful than a book of words or a grammar book. The glorification entails careful sampling of phrases, sensible order in which those phrases are introduced in context and reintroduced in another context, and analyses given in due time. Nihongo Now provides ample support for learners to prepare for the performance, both performance rehearsal in class and performance in the field. Scripts, or in the case of the written language, the texts, are provided along with their English equivalents. The language or orthographic elements used in each scene are provided. New grammatical, cultural, or orthographic concepts and conventions are explained. The web video provides strong visual images of how people interact using language in various cultural contexts. In the activity book and in the material website, there are ample activities that support performance rehearsal. Some are more basic, while others offer actual rehearsal opportunities, if at a basic level. So all the explanations and practice activities feed into this development of cultural and language knowledge, the part that's circled in green here in this cycle of Culture 2 or C2 worldview compilation that we proposed in 2000. You need that knowledge in order to perform. The point in PCA is that C2 L2 knowledge alone is not sufficient, that you need to build the memory of having performed. The personal memory of having performed is a story. We collect many stories to form our C2 worldview, which in turn can be used to further build our C2 L2 knowledge. The more stories of L2 in C2 performances learners develop, the stronger and more sophisticated their worldview will become. Ample C2L2 knowledge supports performance of the scene with rehearsed script. It also supports improvisation. So let's move on to improvisation. Here's an example of improvisation based on the rehearsal scene that you've seen already. But here, the roles are switched. The parts with blue highlight illustrates departures from the rehearsed script. For example, Sasha is no longer the person leaving, but as the person who's remaining, she does not give permission for Mr. Kanda to leave. She also uses full sentences to indicate everything is under control. Kanda-san, on the other hand, uses more truncated forms. The social moves indicated at the bottom become slightly altered as well. Improvisation requires learners to gauge the setting and perform, selecting or creating the language as appropriate. It requires thorough control of the script-based rehearsal. It requires sensitivity to role-task relationship as well as form-task relationship. Having experienced an improvisation like this, learners become more attuned to how they do things in Japanese. Nihongo now also offers suggestions for further improvisation, something for learners to do outside of class when the right opportunity presents itself. Performance in the real world often entails scores. If your performance is good, you score points. If it's bad, you lose points. These points often have a dollar mark or yen mark in front of it. In that sense, those performances are part of life's game. The role of pedagogical material for PCA is selecting and ordering the elements to be learned to provide opportunities for performance rehearsal and performance and possibly games through both script learning and improvisation.
Thank you, Noda Sensei.